There we go. So welcome everyone. This is the Science of Darters and Minnows. We will go ahead and get started, but before we do, I would like my moderator to introduce herself. Paige, if you want to say hello.
Hi, I am Paige. I am the administrative technician in the education division at Nebraska Game and Parks, and I'll be the moderator.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will have a couple of breaks during our programs and just the topics that we discussed that we can do question and answers. Otherwise, we always do a question and answer session at the end as well. So please feel free to put those in there. Paige will be monitoring the chat and we'll be helping if you have any questions. So, all right. Here we go. So darters and minnows, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I hope you have questions and please don't be shy if you do, but just make sure that all the questions and comments that we have in the chat are on topic and they're related to what we're talking about and that you're nice to everybody and we will not have an issue. But if we do, Paige has the right to remove you. So she has a lot of power in this as well. She could remove me if she wanted to. So I will. All right. I also want to point out that I am by no means an expert in anything that I talk about. I do a ton of research and I learn a lot by doing these as well. So it's for your benefit, absolutely. But I also learn a lot too, which is nice. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that. And like I always mention, if you have a question that I don't know, if you email me, I will find someone that does know and I will get back to you. So I want to make sure your questions are answered, but I want to make sure that we answer them to the best quality that we can too. And that's not always me, and I'm fully okay to admit that. All right, so I kind of broke this down into two separate groups. So darters and minnows that we're going to talk about today are in two separate fish families. I kind of group them together just because normally they're small and we don't talk about these small fish. So we're going to talk about darters a little bit and then kind of end with minnows. So just so you kind of know how that is going to be broken down today. So let's go ahead and talk about darters. So the word darter, it actually comes from their type of movement that they do. So they are very small and they dart and dash and everywhere. They make quick little jolty movements. So that's how they get their name, a darter. So members of the darter family, it's actually the perch family. So the Percidae family. Some of these fish are the most kind of evolutionarily advanced fishes that we have, not just in Nebraska, but just in the world in general. And when we talk about what makes them more advanced than other fishes, it's the way that they're bony fishes. That means they simply have bony fish, bones in them. And when we talk about that, it's just the way that those bones and spines and their rays on their fins are moved or in their body and how they're placed and how they're structured in their body. There we go. And then also when we talk about darters, they're normally pretty small, not all of them, like perch are actually not that tiny, but the darters, when I'm really talking about, they're known as the hummingbirds of the fish world. They're usually very colorful, at least the males are very colorful. They're usually small and they're usually pretty quick. The darters, talking about them, they're only found in the Eurasia area and then North America. So when we talk about North America, they're pretty much found east of the Rocky Mountains. Just in North America, we have about 200 species of just darters. Nebraska specifically has 7 species. Darters, so 7 species in the perch family, and darters within that little 7 that we have, they make up the most diverse in that group. So there's 4 of them that we're going to talk about today. A lot of people also might ask, why are we talking about small fish? I can't go fishing for them. Are they good bait? Like, why are we talking about them? So these guys, there are a lot of them are going to be considered an indicator species. So simply meaning these animals let us know how the health of the streams, the lakes, the rivers, the ponds, basically how well is that water doing. We also monitor them fairly heavily. So if we see a lot of darters, their populations are doing well, we can probably assume that that stream has pretty good health. If we keep moving along and we do our sampling and our monitoring, but we start to see a heavily decline in those darters, that's a red flag. That's letting us know that there's something possibly wrong, or the pH has gone down, the pollution has increased. So something is happening. So we call them an indicator species. This could be a stream, a wetland, wherever they're occurring. So if we start seeing a disappearance, that's definitely something that we need to understand why. Something bigger is happening. All right, so when we think of a darter, what do they look like? They're slender, they're cylindrical fish. Usually when we talk about them, they have specific types of scales. So really scales can be put into 4 different categories. The category that darters have are called ctenoid scales. It looks like a C, it starts with a C, but we pronounce it ctenoid scales. So simply meaning when you take one of their scales off and you look at it under a microscope, they have this really cool like comb-like edge on them. So if you think of an old style comb, they have those kind of frilly looking spots on their scales. Their fins also have spines, but just remember they're very small, so they might not be very big. Their dorsal fin, so if you think about like a shark is the best way I can tell people if you don't know what a dorsal fin is, it's divided into 2 separate fins and 2 separate parts. Other fish usually don't have that. 1 or 2 of their spines is also present at the front of their anal fin. So anal meaning in the back, and then which is actually down below. The back fin is actually called the caudal fin. And then their pelvic fin, so if you think about your pelvis, same in position of a fish, they are attached pretty far forward on the body. And then the adult length varies, but most species of darters, they do not grow larger than 3 inches. So thinking about that, it's a pretty small fish. When people have those photos of the largest catfish or walleye that they're catching, they're huge, right? These guys, it's okay to catch something small. So about 3 inches is as big as the adults usually get. All right, so then just so that everyone kind of understands when I talk about pectoral, dorsal, caudal, this is what I mean. So just a really quick anatomy lesson here on the fish. So if you hear the word in front of the fin, think about where it would be on your body. So dorsal fin is always, I think of a shark. It's the thing that you see out of the water. The caudal fin is what we call like their tail fin. Their anal fin is kind of down by where their anus would be. Their pelvic fin, think about where your pelvis is. It's what connects your the rest of your body to your legs. And then your pecs. So your pecs are up here, and that's where that pectoral fin would be. So this is just simply what I mean when I say all those fancy fin types, because I always, for some reason, never remember where they are. But here's a good example for everybody. All right, so just looking at their anatomy, what do they have inside their body? What's going on? So they have teeth, but they're usually very small and inconspicuous. They also have very large fan-shaped fins, which I'll show you some photos here. For being very small fish, their fin shape and their size is actually pretty large in proportion to the rest of their body. And then most darters either have 0 swim bladder, no swim bladder, or a very small or reduced one. So swim bladders are simply what keeps a fish buoyant in the water. They increase it with air and they float, they decrease the amount of air in it and they sink. So not having a swim bladder kind of seems like that fish wouldn't have very good buoyancy. Well, that's okay. Darters don't want to really be at the top of the water column. They want to be at the bottom. So it's okay for them. They use their fins actually to kind of anchor themselves in the water against the rocks. And that is how they're able to stay at the bottom of swift moving streams. So it doesn't really help if you're up here and you're floating away and you're tiny. You need something to be a little bit smaller and stay towards the bottom. So it's kind of cool if you ever put a darter in the water, they immediately sink. They're like a huge, heavy pebble. But then also part of the perch family are things like saugers, the yellow perch, the walleye. They have very well-developed swim bladders. They're larger fish, and they usually like to be at a different space in the water column, but they also like different habitats compared to the other types of animals in that perch family, the darters. All right. Sorry. Habitat and reproduction. So what does their habitat look like? We're really going to talk here about in Nebraska. So typically they're found in small to medium-sized streams. They're rarely found in larger lakes or reservoirs. The exception, as there always is the Iowa darter, which is a species found here in Nebraska. They're pretty abundantly located in the state, and they like the weedy areas, but they also like natural lakes, so a little bit larger of a habitat compared to some of the other ones. And then also, we found that darters tend to reproduce or spawn in certain locations. Other fish, they kind of vary every year. Darters usually like the same types of places. There is some parental care in some fish, but then in some darters, there's not. And then they often spawn in batches. So simply meaning that when they lay eggs, the female will release 10 every once in a while so that they're all literally not in one spot. So she will often release them in batches, and we'll see that there's one that releases almost 900 eggs, but she does it like 10 at a time. So we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so kind of a little bit about their life cycle. So most darters, they will spawn in the spring or the early summer. They will go to their spawning location, and then usually it's spring or summer. The males are pretty territorial. They occupy small territories, and what really helps them out is they usually possess beautiful, bright colors. And I mean blues and oranges and reds, very, very bright colors to attract those females in. And then during the time when they are not breeding, this is only when they're breeding, they're usually kind of a tan, brownish, kind of a clear color. This just helps them blend in with the rocks at the bottom of a lake or a stream. And then most of them, like I mentioned, most darters don't have parental care. That's just something that they're not known for. The exception is the Johnny darter that we do have in Nebraska. They have amazing parental care. We'll talk about that. And then, like I mentioned, those non-breeding colors, they have tans, browns, the darker spots, and the saddles. All right, so habitat and conservation. So they're adapted basically for life in those swift flowing streams. So again, they don't have that swim bladder, so they can sink to the bottom and kind of anchor themselves into that area. But there's also some darters that don't like swift moving streams. So this is not something that we can collectively say that all of them have this or all of them do this. And like I mentioned, when you put them in the bottom or when you put them in the water, they immediately sink. They press against the current. They have enlarged pectoral fins, so pecs, thinking up here on your chest, and basically they hold them in place in the water at the bottom of a stream. And they spend a lot of time beneath the rocks. They're tiny, so you have to remember they're prey species for a lot of other animals. And then again, they get their name because they have short, quick dashes, and we call them, they're darting, so we call them darters. All right, so what do they eat? They're just like other fish. They eat small aquatic insects. They could eat anything from crustaceans to crayfish, sometimes snails. There are some species that are a little bit more generalist in their diet. They'll pretty much eat anything, but there are some that are more specialized, so they have to eat certain things. But most of the time, it's probably any one of these things. You have to think about in Nebraska, there's a lot of different types of food, but a lot of fish will eat either other insects or aquatic insects, or they'll even eat sometimes fish eggs. So it just kind of depends on where you're finding them or their type of species. All right, so why should we care about darters? I always like to talk about those ecosystem connections. People are very one-minded. We want to know, how can this help us, and how can, what are they going to do for us? But we also have to think about that ecosystem connection as well. So most species, when we talk about that, they do not like that silt, and they don't like pollution. So again, they're those indicator species. They're letting us know if something is going on in the streams and in the wetlands. They're very, very sensitive to that habitat degradation. And that is, like, again, a red flag for humans to let us know that something's going on with that water. We need to check this out. With that being so sensitive, a large proportion, and even in Nebraska, of our smaller fish, like our darters and our dace, they are threatened, endangered, or sometimes even what we call a tier 1 or a tier 2 species. So we have every state wildlife agency has a blueprint or a guideline pretty much about how we should manage our species and how we should go about conserving and what should we do. So we call that a state wildlife action plan. Sometimes you might hear the word SWAP being placed around. So every state has one, and Nebraska's is specifically called the Legacy Project, the Nebraska Natural Legacy Project. So within that SWAP, or that state wildlife action plan, we have something listed as a tier 1 or a tier 2 species, or even a species of concern. So these are a lot of those species that are threatened and endangered. They are listed as possibly something in Nebraska we need to be mindful of. It might not be an endangered species in another state or a threatened species, but here in Nebraska, it's something that we need to be mindful of. All right, and then like I mentioned, if they do have darters in a stream, again, that indicator species, If you have them, that's good. That means that your stream quality or your water quality is pretty good. And then also some species, they will clear the habitat for other types of fish species to spawn. So it's those larger fish that a lot of people would want to go fishing for, the walleye and the crappie and the bluegill. A lot of these species, and we'll talk about these in a second, they clear the bottom of the algae. There are a lot of algae eaters, and so they clear those areas, or they kind of rig up part of the soot at the bottom, and that leaves room for clear, good habitat for spawning for other types of fish. All right, do we have any questions? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and talk about some species that are in Nebraska. Yes, someone, thank you for clarifying. Yep, darters, or sorry, bluegills are not quite in the darter family. Thank you, Adrian, for doing that. Okay, that was it. All right, so we'll go ahead and talk about the darter species here in Nebraska. I understand and recognize that I did say the perch family, which includes like the walleye and the saugers. I did not include those when I'm talking about darters. I figure you get enough information about the sport fish, so let's talk about the fish that don't get enough love. So, so here's one of them that we have in Nebraska. And this is the Iowa darter. It's, you know, fondly named for the state we have the most rivalry with. But this is the Iowa darter. And the photos that I have are going to generally be the male breeding colors, because this is what people don't see. These are the bright, pretty, brilliantly colored fish that people don't know about. So as you all will kind of see here in these photos, they're elongated fish. They're pretty much like compressed, and they're slightly laterally compressed, this one, and they're kind of rounded and short. Their body is arched. They have upper and lower jaws. They actually have pretty sharp teeth. And when I talk about sharp teeth, you got to remember that they're maybe 3 inches long. So some fish will have what we call pharyngeal lips or pharyngeal teeth. So think of like they're teeth, but they're made more of the cartilage. They almost feel like sandpaper when you touch them. If you've ever put your hand on like a bass or a bluegill or something, you can kind of feel those teeth. They're not quite like a teeth that we have. And then most of the darters are going to have like a squared off caudal fin. So that's that tail fin. And then most of them are going to be sexually dimorphic. So that means the females and males look very different. And at times it's very easy to tell them apart. Generally, females are larger, not always. They usually are a little bit larger because they have eggs and they need to hold all them and have the space for them. And then the breeding males for the Iowa darters, they're going to be quite colorful. So you can see those big blue bars that come down on this fish. They turn blue, and then intermixed in between, you get these pretty red kind of brick colors. And then the lower sides, kind of down here by their pectoral fins, they're going to be really kind of a yellowy color. So this is all for the females. This is them trying to show them that they have the best genes and then their brightest color, so that a female would want to hopefully mate with them. So these guys, pretty scattered north of the Platte River. They're commonly found in those natural lakes and ponds. But these guys, weirdly enough, they like slow moving streams with lots of vegetation because that's where they hide. We talked earlier about a lot of darters liking swift moving streams. This is not the case for this one. And then spawning is usually April to June in Nebraska. And usually the max length for these guys is about 2 to 3/4 inches. So about 3 inches long is like their max size that adults are going to get. All right. And then you have something called the Johnny Darter. These guys are a little bit different. They almost look like a tetrafish with those big billowing, the dorsal fins and the caudal fins. They have a little bit bigger rays and fans in their tails or on their fins, but they're very slender. They're kind of like a goby in the mouth, if you ever know what those are. They have that squared off caudal fin again. These guys are pretty recognizable because of the X's and the W's that are on their scale patterns. Right here, you can see a W, or an X. Use your, imagination here, but they do have them. So that's a great way to tell these different types of fish apart. But breeding males, again, they're going to have the black heads, and then some of their tips of their rays and their spines are going to have white on them. So instead of being this bright, super colorful fish, the Johnny Darter is a little bit more of that straw blackish color. And then these, they're pretty common within their range. They're usually found in Nemaha, Lower Platte, and the Elkhorn rivers. And then pretty much until 1970, they were considered uncommon. I don't know if we just didn't have the monitoring. We didn't know that they were here. We didn't do a good job of finding them. But then all of a sudden, until like after the 1970s, like we just found a ton of them. So we're pretty just sure that we just weren't monitoring correctly and we didn't know what we were doing. But now we know that they're pretty abundant here. Creeks, rivers along the shorelines, they spawn in April or May. Like I mentioned earlier, we have those tier 1, tier 2 species. So in Nebraska, the Johnny Darter is considered a tier 2 species, which simply means that they're pretty much doing well in other states, but in Nebraska, they're kind of not maybe the best and they're not maybe the most stable. So we put them as a tier 2 species, something that kind of should be monitored and something that we need to pay attention to. And then the Johnny Darter is actually part of the super cool group of fish. It's known for egg clustering. So if you ever go to a slow moving stream or the shorelines or creeks and you lift up something flat, you might see some little fish eggs underneath it. More than likely that could be eggs from like a Johnny Darter. So they attach eggs to the underside of flat objects. That's one of the only fish in Nebraska that does this, but it's a whole group of fish that egg cluster. This is the only one in Nebraska. So kind of cool. All right, this guy is probably one of the most colorful. This is called the Orangethroat Darter. They have a little bit deeper, bigger, stouter body and appearance. This one is actually a subspecies, so we call it the Plains Orangethroat Darter. Just a couple subspecies within the region, and then males and females again are going to have that sexual dimorphism. Females are usually pretty drab, they're brown, they're not super colorful. This is what the breeding males look like. So super bright. They have these blue bars that run down intermixed with the red, and then these guys are primarily found south of the Platte River. But there are a few scattered populations in the sandhills as well. So basically the throat is where they get their name. You can kind of see that orange throat on them. Again, that's how they get their name, the Plains Orangethroat Darter. So that only occurs when it's breeding or spawning season for the males. All right, they're found in small streams. They do like a variety of substrates. So they could have gravel, they could have some sand. It doesn't really matter. They're pretty adaptable. But they do like some, or at least they can stand some turbidity. So a little bit of non-clear water, they can add a little bit of muddy or silty water. And then also they spawn in April to June. Females will usually lay about 100 to 200 eggs. They're deposited in the gravel. Adults, as they get older, caddisflies, insects, other fish's eggs. And then again, this is a tier 2 species in Nebraska, just simply meaning that they're not doing as well here as they are in other states. And that's something we just need to be aware of. All right, and then you have the Blackside Darter. So this one again kind of looks like that goby, oval shaped blotches along the side. You get to see these really cool lower fins. Their pectoral fins are very tiny. And then also their fins darken, and then their eye color has been reported to change to a gold color during the breeding season for males. And then also they have what's called a complete lateral line. So not all of the darters have that. I know it's very hard to see, but if you've ever held a fish, you will see this like almost like a stitching of a line going across their body. That's to help them kind of detect electrocurrents in the water, vibrations in the water. It just helps them kind of see better, basically. So they have a complete lateral line that runs all the way across their body. Other darters in Nebraska do not. This one's pretty widespread. It goes all the way from Nebraska to Manitoba. In Nebraska, you can find them on the upper Elkhorn River historically, but most recently we found them just below South Sioux City, Iowa in Missouri. And then they habit small creeks. Their spawning occurs in either May or June. Females will actually arrive at the reproductive sites first, and then males will follow later. The larvae usually drift in the column for 3 weeks or so, and then they finally settle to the ground. We did at one point that they think that these guys were completely extirpated from Nebraska. So simply meaning we thought that they were gone in Nebraska until 2010 when we did some monitoring and we found them again. But we found that they move a lot. So we wonder if that's maybe why. And they move up tributaries, usually in the springtime, to spawn. All right, so that was our 4 darter species that we have in Nebraska. And now minnows are a huge another category that we're going to talk about. But are there any Are darters eaten by sport fish? Absolutely. They will, some of those sport fish will eat anything. They have usually large gaping mouths. And if they're here, that's something that they could definitely eat as well. Can the Iowa darter be found in Iowa? If not, then why is that called the Iowa darter? Good question. I'm sure they can be. I didn't really look if it was outside Nebraska. I don't have my fish book with me, but everyone that registered, I will give you a really good link to a Fishes of Nebraska book where I got a lot of this information. It's a great book and it has good pictures and it talks about each species individually. So it might give you some more information on that as well. What are the extinct species that were once in Nebraska? Oh gosh, I could not tell you that. I'm just gonna be really honest. Fish are not my forte. I did a lot of research just to find this information, but good question, Nathan. That was something that I would need to look up or ask one of our fish biologists too. Do darters live at the bottom of the frozen lake during the winter or do they die? Ooh, good. So they, just like other fish, usually when we think about the water freezing, the water is the coldest in the top. So usually fish will sink or go to the bottom. They almost go through like a brumation or a hibernation mode where their heart rate slows down, their breathing slows down. They don't move a lot just because they don't want to burn that energy. So yes, that would be something. They don't die. They just simply go kind of dormant at the bottom of the pond or lake or stream, wherever they are. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. I saw someone ask about minnows and dace. We'll go ahead and talk about those. So minnows are a huge group of fish that we're going to talk about. So what is a minnow and how does that compare to like a darter? Well, they're both found to be very small. Usually when people talk about minnows, it's almost like the trashy fish. I don't know a better way to say it, but they're like bait species or they're small or they're insignificant. Scientists thought that a lot, but truth is that they do a lot of good and there's a lot of economics and ecological importance on them. But basically we refer to them instead of minnows. They're in the Cyprinidae family. So this could be everything from goldfish in your house, your carps, your stonerollers, your chubs, your shiners, but then also like those true minnows. Mostly they're exclusively fresh water. There's a huge diverse range of sizes when we talk about that too, because as we know, some goldfish could be tiny, some goldfish could be 7 pounds. And then also they have a huge bunch of species, 200 genre, about 2,000 species. It's about 8% of all known fish are just in that minnow family. So it's a huge group. People think it is the largest group of freshwater fish, but then it may be the largest family of just vertebrates in the world. So that's a huge bunch of fish. So why are they important? A lot of commercial, nutritional, like scientific, recreational values. They're in the food chain. So anything that's in the food chain is going to be of some type of importance. They eat something, something eats them. So lots of birds will eat them. Different types of animals will eat their eggs. Why is it important? Culinary wise, people eat a lot of food and they eat a lot of fish. They're in that importance of the culinary world. Goldfish, for instance, are a huge and popular species to have as pets. A lot of people like rival and want goldfish and have them. And then also some of them are sports fish in that family. The carp at one time, some people really try to catch carp because they're a good eating fish. So that could be considered that sports fish. And then also the zebra fish has a really cool genetics research of importance as well. So there's lots of different reasons why these fish are important, even though they might not be the highest money makers out there. All right, so these guys are found in North America, Africa, and Eurasia. There's quite a few of them. Their jaws and their palates are always toothless, but again, they have those pharyngeal teeth in either 1 or 2 rows. So again, that kind of cartilaginous type of feeling when you touch inside their mouth. And then they don't have an adipose fin. So adipose fin is if you think of the dorsal fin on a shark, and then you go back to the caudal fin, there's usually a little fin in between that. And that is that adipose fin. The head is usually scaleless. And then these guys, just huge range in size, everything from 12 millimeters all the way to 2.5 meters. That's a huge fish. All right, so their evolutionary history. All these guys are egg layers. They don't have live birth, so they're egg layers. Their breeding habits, they don't usually guard their eggs. There are some that do, but usually they don't. And then there are some that are found in what we call a brackish water, which is kind of a mix of salt and fresh, but most of the time you're going to find them in fresh water. Their fossils date back all the way to the Eocene from Asia. And the earliest European and North American ones were found in the Oligocene age. And then also we think that they invaded, came into North America across that Bering land bridge about 32 million years ago when sea levels were very low. All right, so let's talk about the species that we have in Nebraska. So 32 different types of species. It's the largest and the most diverse group of fish families that we have here. Some species, like I mentioned, they're found in brackish water, but we don't have that in Nebraska. So all of ours are freshwater species. And then also some of them are very generalized when they eat, but then also some of them are very highly specialized when they eat. But you can find them anywhere: small creeks, ponds, streams, large rivers, reservoirs, pretty much anywhere there's going to be some type of minnow. All right, so these guys are my favorite. Besides the pelosturgeon, these guys are my favorite. They're called central stonerollers. They're not the super brightest colored fish, but they have this cool little hard pellet or plate on their mouth, and they will actually eat off the different algae and scrape it off the rocks. But they get their name stonerollers because they actually roll stones. The males are usually larger than the females, which is a little different in fish, but they have this really cool like plate that's made of cartilage on the bottom of their lip, and they're mostly vegetarian, which is different for a lot of minnows, but they will scrape algae off of the bottom. And these guys, they also have a very long coiled swim bladder. So these are ones that do have a swim bladder because the darters were ones that did not. All right. Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't mention how they roll their stones. I thought I had another slide, sorry. So these guys, the males will actually dig pits to breed. And so with their mouth or their nose, they will actually roll stones out of the way. So that's how they got their name, stone rollers. They're just really cute. I like the colors. All right. Someone asked about dace. So dace are actually in the minnow family. So here's one of them. This is the northern red belly dace. This is a really small minnow. Usually you get these really pretty breeding colors of the reds and the yellows in the males. Sometimes people will call these a glacial relic. So they really haven't changed much. They are pretty an ancient type of fish in their anatomy and their physiology. So they've kind of just been masked by other fish, but they're here and they're very small. They do have a very limited range in Nebraska, which puts them as a threatened species. You can find them in the Platte, the Niobrara, and the Loop, but in the small like headwater tributaries of those, and they really need cool, clear waters. So something that we've been finding, and another reason that they may be threatened, are cool streams. Cool water streams are becoming warm water streams. So the temperature is rising, the water temperature is rising. Even though it might not seem like a significant change for us, that half degree, 1 degree, 2 degrees is a huge difference for animals that live there year round, especially for even our trout species. Sometimes they live like cool water streams and like cool areas. It's really hard to be a trout when it's not a cool water stream. So it affects lots of different species, not just the tiny little dace. All right, so these guys, red shiners, they're pretty laterally compressed minnow. When we look at them, they have that like typical minnow shape. These are actually pretty popular in aquarium settings, but then also some people use them for bait as well. You can find them pretty much anywhere in Nebraska. They're what we call a true ecological generalist. So simply meaning they will eat anything. They are quite adaptable, but they really do pretty much, you can find them all over the body or all over the bodies of water in Nebraska. One thing about them is they have very unique diamond shaped scales if you look closely. And we think this is the most common fish that you'd probably find in Nebraska, not sunfish, not bluegill, but these guys. So very, very common, even though you might not be looking for them all the time. All right, here's another one that doesn't have those like bright, shiny colors, but they're metallic. Look at them. They're so cool. They're sparkly. So we also have a Western silvery minnow in Nebraska. These two, the Plains minnow and the Western silvery, look very similar to each other. There are a few slight differences. The dorsal surface, so up here, is tan and the sides are silvery. These guys occur pretty much in every major river system, but we have not found them in the Blue River system. So if you're in that area, sorry, we don't have them, but they do like the sandy runs and the really deep silt pools. These guys will really like turbid rivers, which is kind of weird, which is the really muddy kind of not polluted, but the muddy, non-clear rivers. And they usually travel in school. So in a groups or they cluster together. And then their reproduction lasts from spring to summer. And basically it's triggered by the snowmelt. So the snowmelt and the storms, they will stir up the water and produce rises and flows. And that's what gets them to cue that it's time to spawn. And then we believe in just in the last 20 years of monitoring that there has been a decline in their population, especially in like the southern portion of their range in Nebraska. We believe that's because of like the channelization of the Missouri, the pollutions, the construction of their habitat. So the same reason that a lot of other fish species have been in trouble as well. All right, so this is the sturgeon chub. So our chubs are also in the minnow family. They're pretty streamlined when we look at them. So they have a pretty like a torpedo shape on them. They do, and I know you can't see it in the photo, but they do have prominent barbels, so little like catfish-like whiskers on the bottom of their mouth, their subterminal mouth. And then these guys, there's not a lot of sexual dimorphism, so males and females look pretty much similar. They have the black and they have the silver on the sides. It's kind of hard to tell females and males apart from each other. And then also in Nebraska, they're found only in the Missouri River and the Platte River just west to Fremont. Past then, they're not found, but they really like fast turbid waters. They really don't know a lot about their reproduction behavior. So that's probably why they're considered a state endangered species. So we're kind of data deficient in some of that stuff. But again, that might be something to monitor in the future. All right, I'm sure everyone's seen one of these. We do call them an invasive species. They are not originally from this part of the world, but they do get very large, and they were purposely imported to the United States by the United States Fish Commission in 1877. These ones are going to be closely related to your goldfish. So these guys have that really big, deep, like gaping body and the mouth. They are kind of pretty. They have that bronzy color, and then they get kind of yellowy on the belly, but they're actually from China. So a lot of people eat these fish, but they found pretty much any body of water. You can find them in Nebraska. They're pretty adaptable. In most areas that are polluted or turbid or murky, these fish can survive. Other fish would die. These guys are just super adaptable. That is one of the characteristics of an invasive species, is they're adaptable, they're prolific breeders. They pretty much check all those boxes to be an invasive species. So, and they also lay their eggs over vegetation, which is just something that carp do. But then also the reason that they were brought here to the United States is because they were imported as a fish food. So this was something that a lot of people ate. It was easy to move them by rail car and like stock them in streams and rivers and lakes, and people eat them. So if you're interested in trying carp, we do have events where you can come try carp. It's totally escaping me right now, the name that we have. It's like, oh, Carporama. There we go. You can come join Carporama, and they will actually catch lots of carp, and you can deep fry them and eat them. So if you're ever interested in trying a carp, try our Carporama events that we have. All right, and then you have the creek chub. These guys are a large minnow, but they have like medium-sized scales. They have quite a few of them. And then these are found throughout Nebraska. Females are pretty plain, but the males really have those kind of orangey colors on their pectoral fins. The species here really prefer like the sandy or the gravelly headwaters in those small rivers. These guys, males will guard the nest, but they will allow other minnow species to spawn over the gravel that has been cleared by their activity. So basically they have their area, they'll move the gravel and the stones to one side, they'll let other males spawn over there, but this is their area. So again, this is an area or a fish that allows and helps other animals spawn and to clear that gravel for other fish species to spawn. These are also a site predator. Does not look like a predatory fish, but it is. They eat lots of aquatic insects, some invertebrates, and even smaller fish. And we believe that they're one of the largest naturally occurring predator fishes or fish in the smaller streams of Nebraska. So again, they're kind of an interesting fish. All right, so there's 32 different kinds of minnows, and you probably maybe saw one that I did not include. You also have to think about like your big head carp or our Asian carp that we have. I just couldn't, for time's sake, go through all of them. I just kind of picked some that were interesting to me and that maybe we had never heard of before. So all right, we only have a couple more science ofs left. Next week, we'll be talking about dragonflies and damselflies, and then we'll wrap up our winter series on February 9th with ungulates. So if you're not sure what an ungulate is, hopefully the deer will give you some context clues. It's more interesting than deer, I promise. So we'll go ahead and talk about ungulates, and then we will be done for our winter series already. So if you liked this, we did record it and we will be posting it on our education YouTube channel. I know a lot of people that do our evaluations, they always ask to see like fungi or raptors or birds of prey, all these different types of themes that they want to do a science of. If you check out our YouTube channel, there might already have been a science of those things done. I know I did one on raptors last year. There's been ones on fungi. There's been some on birds. So all of those might be on there already. So check out our YouTube channel. We also have a Facebook page, Nebraska Wildlife Education. You can find out all of our events that are happening, some fun facts on there, just kind of it's what's really going on in our division. So I really urge you, if you're on social media, to follow our Instagram and our Facebook, and then also our Nebraska Wildlife Education website as well. All right, so thanks everyone. We will go ahead and talk about dragonflies and damselflies next week. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Paige, do we have any thing in the chat?
We do. Let me see here. Oh, one was, what is the rarest minnow?
Oh, geez. That's a good question. I just saw that one. I would probably assume something that's either threatened or endangered. That sturgeon chub is one that's an endangered species, but I don't know technically how rare it is. So I would have to look that up, or I probably would ask Daryl. I have no idea. That's a good question. Are shad considered minnows? Yes, I think that they were in the, do not quote me on that. I have that Fishes of Nebraska book that I would have to look that up, but I think I'm thinking of shiners. So maybe not, Tom. That's a good question as well. I told you I'm a herp person and a mammal person. So if you have fish questions, I have very limited knowledge and I would have to look those up. I'll be very honest. So, can you send me a link to the recording? Yes, everyone that registered, even if you're not here, that registered for the Science of, I will be putting us on our Game and Parks Education YouTube channel. Probably give me about till noon tomorrow, but I will send an email out to everyone with some resources and then some feedback. If you click our SurveyMonkey evaluation and do that, you will get some swag, and then also the link to this recording too. Someone asked, did they have any ideas why these fish are so shiny? It seems like they would be bad as far as camouflage. Yes, so some of the fish where they will live in very clear water streams. And so the shine actually looks like something would be shining off of the rocks or the water. The fish, especially that have like the camouflage where it gets dark and then it gets light underneath their belly, like sharks and catfish are a good example. So when you look down, it looks dark. When you look up, it looks like the rays reflecting off the sun and the water. I assume that it's something like that they live in probably clear water streams with the gravel or that substrate that's pretty clear, and it helps them be shiny in the water. It looks like things are reflecting off of each other. Very informative. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. Yes, if anyone has any other questions, Someone said, I don't see the fungi YouTube video. It should not be, okay, found it. Sweet. It shouldn't be removed. Okay. So yes, if you have any more questions, I can stick around here for a few more seconds, but otherwise we will see you all next week for dragonflies and damselflies. Thank you so much for joining me, and we hope that we see you next week. So I hope you have a great day, everyone. Great weekend. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paige. I think you left. Thanks, Paige. All right.